Gwinnett County Public Library's Five Forks branch, I'd like to welcome you all to Cooking with Chef Jeff, a GCPL culinary series. Now, I'm Chef Jeff, and today you'll be learning how this professional chef makes the best tasting mashed potatoes and gravy you've ever had. And you'll be able to use some of these tips and tricks today to really wow your friends and family this upcoming holiday season with one of the most underrated dishes that is part of any meal. So, let's begin. Now, mashed potatoes and gravy are quintessential Americana. I mean, everybody loves them. But how many times have you had mashed potatoes and gravy that really just changed the way you looked at it? And they are very simple, but just like with anything in life, even if it is simple, it's worth doing right. To really make a proper mashed potato, it all starts with one thing, the potato. For the best mashed potatoes, you want a potato that's high in starch. You want, something that's nice and colorful. That's why I always go with a Yukon Gold. The Yukon Golds will make a very, very creamy mashed potato and one that has brilliant color to it. Okay, so what we'll do is we will dice our Yukon Gold potatoes up just a little bit because we really want them to cook uniformly. One important thing when making mashed potatoes is if you cook them too long, the mashed potatoes will end up getting waterlogged, so they won't be as creamy as they should be. So I'm just going to cut most of these up into quarters here, just to make them nice and uniform. So see, I got a little guy here. I'm going to cut him up in half. But the rest of these, I'll cut into quarters, and you can really see how brilliantly yellow these potatoes are. They're really a beautiful thing. And if you don't know, you might not be able to find Yukon Golds at Publix, but you should be able to find them at any Sprouts or any sort of more specialty store. Another important thing with mashed potatoes is you always want to start with cold water. If you start with hot water, what's going to end up happening is the outside of the potato will start cooking before the inside. Okay? And again, what that's going to do is that's going to cause the outside of the potato to become waterlogged, and you're going to get that grainy texture that just isn't so nice. Once we get these boiling, we'll get started on our gravy. Okay. One other important thing to note here is you don't want to salt the water before you start cooking, unlike with something like pasta where you really want to salt it ahead of time, because it can really throw off the salt balance. Now, just like with the mashed potatoes and needing to start with a great potato, the gravy is going to be a thickened chicken or beef stock or even turkey stock. So what's important there is to start with a great stock. I have here some chicken stock I made at home. I just made it, instead of using a whole chicken, what I do is I get the chicken backs, because a lot of the flavor for your stock is going to come out of the bones, and you don't want to waste the meat by just cooking it all the way down. Other people, or depending on the circumstance, you may may use the drippings that you have from roasting a prime rib or from roasting a turkey or from roasting a chicken. Those are great as well. You just want to be careful that the liquid that comes out isn't too salty, because it can be at times. So how we're going to start this gravy is we're going to start by making a roux. All right, a roux is a very classical French sauce thickener. It's just a combination of equal parts by weight whole butter and flour. Now, what's important with the roux is some people will thicken their gravies with cornstarch or any number of things, maybe taro root powder. The thing with roux is it's also going to include some fat, all right, and that's going to make the sauce very velvety in the mouth, as opposed to just being thickened with cornstarch. So what I'll do here is I'm going to melt my butter over low heat. I don't want the butter to burn. I just want to melt it down. And as soon as it's melted, I'm going to go ahead and add my flour. I just use all-purpose flour. There's no need to get fancy here. Just stick with what works. Now, this is probably one of the most common ingredients you can find in most kitchens is a roux, and it's because they'll use it to thicken just about everything. Got to make sure my potatoes will stay boiling here. Whenever you're cooking, it's something as simple as a pan is really important to the cooking process, a pan or a pot. I am a big fan of Le Creuset or All Clad because they have a really thick bottom, and that thick bottom is going to stop from having hot spots in the pan or from things burning. It's just going to keep a nice even heat. Now that my butter's melted, I'm going to go ahead and add my flour. And again, this is going to be equal parts flour and butter by weight. So if you use a stick of butter, which is what I used in this case, I'm going to add 4 ounces of flour, because a stick of butter is is almost always exactly a quarter pound. Once I add my flour, I'm just going to go ahead and whisk. I want to make sure that all the granules of flour get coated in the fat nicely. And depending on who you're talking to and what they're making, roux can come in all colors. We're going to be making a blonde roux today, which basically just means I'm going to kind of boil the flour and butter for a little bit. But let's say you're cooking Cajun. They're big fans of cooking roux until they're like dark brown, almost chocolatey. And it really is an art. You can sit over a pot stirring for hours and burn it at the last minute and wouldn't be very happy about that. Something important when I'm cooking my roux, make sure that you keep the pan moving, because although it looks kind of like a sauce, there's still all those little grains of flour in there, are individual little granules, and they will burn separately, and won't taste very good. So the lovely thing about these induction burners is they heat up pretty quick. So I am just about boiling here. Now, with our with our mashed potatoes today and our gravy, I'm going to add a little bit of herbs to my gravy because I love the flavor of fresh herbs. And what I've got today is going to be a little bit of fresh rosemary and fresh thyme that I actually picked out of my garden this morning. I know everybody might not have access to stuff right out of the garden, but today I did. So now that my roux is boiling here, I'm going to add my chicken stock. Something important to know. Whenever you're thickening a sauce with roux, you've always got to have a hot, cold, okay? So in this case, I'm going to have hot roux and cold stock. You could do it the other way. You could do cold roux and hot stock. But it's important because if both are hot or cold, you will end up with dumplings, and you might as well just stop and go ahead and make chicken and dumplings at that point. So, let me add my stock here. And I want to make sure I continue whisking after I add my stock to the roux. Again, that way it doesn't get clumpy. Now, in this case, I have 1 quart of chicken stock. So to get the correct consistency, I need about 8 ounces of roux. So what that means is this: I need 4 ounces of butter, 4 ounces of flour. So that's how. That's the ratio I'm going to use today, and it's a pretty common ratio. You need about 8 ounces of roux for every quart of sauce that you're going to be thickening, and that'll get you to a nice gravy consistency. Now, depending on what you're thickening, if you're thickening, milk for a cheese sauce, like you're making homemade mac and cheese, then you'd actually need a little less, because you don't want to, milk's already got fat in it, it's already a little thick. So you just gotta be careful, and just like with anything, it's always better to add less to start and add more at the end, because like my mom always says, you can always add, but you can't take away. Cut up these fresh herbs. Notice I'm going to take the thyme and the rosemary off the stems, because I just want the flowers. The little leaves and the flowers are where all the great flavor is. You'll also notice I'm not adding it while it's cooking. I'm actually going to add the herbs once the gravy is done, and the reason being is that the flavor will be much nicer with the fresh herb flavor. As you cook herbs, whether it be like a marinara sauce or tomato sauce, and you cook that basil into it for hours, it doesn't even taste like basil anymore. But if you add the basil right at the end, that's how you get great flavor. What I was saying was when you're adding herbs, if you keep those herbs nice and fresh and add them at the end, it's really going to be a lovely flavor, and it all depends on what you're cooking and what you're trying to accomplish. So let's say I was making a nice stew and I wanted more of a muddled rosemary flavor. I would add it at the beginning. But let's say I'm cooking a nice piece of lamb and I want a very fresh rosemary flavor in my sauce. I'd add it at the end, just like I'm going to do here with my gravy. I'm going to add those herbs at the end. I've also, for the potatoes themselves, I've got some lovely chives to add, but we'll add those to the potatoes. So when you're using a roux, there is one important thing to keep in mind. It's got flour in it, right? If you don't bring whatever sauce that you're using to a complete rolling boil, after you add your roux, 2 things are going to happen. First off, it's going to taste kind of like flour from the flour itself. The other thing is that you're not going to be getting the full thickening power of the roux without it coming up to a rolling boil. Okay, so my gravy just came up to a nice rolling boil. So next step here is I'm going to go ahead and add my herbs, and I'm going to season it, and it's going to be ready for the mashed potatoes. I come up to a nice boil again, just to cook the herbs just the slightest bit. And then that's it. Very simple, very easy homemade gravy. It's going to go great over your mashed potatoes. I've always been a potato fan. I could eat potatoes fried, mashed, it doesn't matter. However you want to serve them to me, I'm good with it. There you have it, super simple homemade gravy. Now all we have to do is wait for our potatoes to finish boiling and we will get to enjoy it on top of some lovely mashed potatoes. Okay, and now our potatoes are cooked. Now something important to know here, like we were talking about earlier, is the potatoes are tender, but they're not turning into mashed potatoes already in our pot. You can see they still hold a little bit of shape, but I can pierce them very easily and with my spoon, and the spoon comes right out, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're going to drain them and we're going to mash them. Now you can do this a couple of ways, whether it be you have a KitchenAid mixer, whether you have a ricer. That's normally the best method. All right, got those all drained. I'm just gonna let them drain for a second, because again, we don't wanna have any extra water, because that extra water is just, it's gonna make them soupy rather than creamy. Right. Bring my bowl over here to put my potatoes in so I don't drip water all over the library's floor, because I'm sure they wouldn't be too happy about that. All right. Now, this is a KitchenAid mixer, probably the best home mixer you can buy on the market. They will stand the test of time. I've had this one for, gosh, 7 or 8 years. I've dropped it off the counter, and it keeps going, so things are good. I've got my heavy cream, okay? Heavy cream, using heavy cream instead of milk is really important because milk is normally a couple of percent of milk fat. Heavy cream is anywhere between 36 to 40% milk fat. And again, that's going to lend to having very creamy potatoes. And it's also going to help to make sure they're not all soupy. Okay, I'm going to add my butter. Again, you can never have too much butter when you're making mashed potatoes. It's like ingredient number 1. Load up my mixer here. Must have unplugged it earlier. Okay. I'll load up my mixer here. All right, I'm going to turn it on. Now, I don't want to over whip my potatoes, okay? And why that is as you whip the potatoes, the starch is going to come out of them. And what that's going to end up doing is it's going to make really like gummy potatoes the longer you mix. So you literally just want to whip them as long as it takes to make them creamy and no more. You know, leaving them on whipping forever isn't smart. Okay, I'm gonna add the rest of my salt. Let's turn this on and let this bad boy run for just a minute here. Okay. One last ingredient I'm going to add because they're just absolutely delicious are the chives, okay? If you don't know, chives come from the onion family. They're a lot like green onions, but they have a much more delicate flavor to them. And they're absolutely delicious in potatoes. I'm going to chop them up nice and fine here. If you don't get them quite as fine at home, that's okay. You know, I've been doing this for quite a few years, so I've kind of gotten pretty good at cutting things. This is just going to add a nice little subtle onion flavor. So if you don't like onions, feel free to omit it. Okay. Mix those in just a bit. I'm also going to scoop down the sides of my bowl here to make sure that everything gets mixed in and all the little lumps are out. All right, there you have it. Creamy, delicious mashed potatoes. So you want to serve these. Now, personally, I put a lot of gravy on my mashed potatoes, but if I were just displaying it for the house, I'll make a little well in the center. And put just a touch of my gravy in there. Just enough so people can see what it is. And there you have it. Creamy, delicious mashed potatoes. And it doesn't really require you to do much different than what you already do. It's just a matter of the details. Choosing the right potatoes, you know, getting a Yukon Gold that's going to be nice and creamy. Using good butter, good heavy cream. The bit of chives in there just to really accentuate the flavor of the potatoes. You know, using the right amount of salt with your potatoes. I always tell cooks this. What do potatoes love? Potatoes love salt, you know, and it's almost like they're singing out in unison in my kitchen because they know what I expect. You know, so thank you for joining us today with the Gwinnett County Public Library System here at our Five Forks Stricken branch. And can't wait to see you next time with Cooking with Chef Jeff, and we'll see what I've got in store for you next time. Thank you very much, everybody.